Thank you, Ciaran Lynch, and I'd like to thank my Labour Party colleagues who spoke on this amendment this evening and other contributors.
2 minutes left in the slot.
Thank you, Ciaran Lynch. Ciaran Lynch, the most read document this month in Ireland will not be any book on the present bestseller list. It will be the individual pay slips and social welfare receipts of the thousands of people who are witnessing their household income drop month by month as we bail out the banks, or as this government proposed to bail out the banks, and we see the decisions of the recent budget come into place. And one single question that will get asked and asked again as people look at the bottom right-hand corner of that slip is why? Why is it that the simple expectations that they had of themselves, their families, and for their children, why have these vanished without a trace? And why is it that they are now being told that they must take responsibility in picking up the pieces of what can only be described as the biggest economic crisis this country has ever faced? Why is it that they are being asked to take the share of the responsibility, having received none of the benefit? In answering this question, we must begin by understanding that the financial crisis we are in is also a political crisis. A crisis caused by Fianna Fáil's governance of the economy and the policy decisions it made over the last decade. Policy decisions like property tax relief, soft-touch regulation, the triangular relationship between Fianna Fáil-led government, developers and bankers, and the issue of how political funding was allowed to operate. These were not decisions made in the boardrooms of EIB, Bank of Ireland, or Anglo for that matter, or for any other factor. They were not made on building sites by developers or builders. These were decisions made in this House, and therefore those who enacted these policies should be held accountable by this House and inquired into by their peers. It may be difficult to state when the financial and political crisis began exactly, but one thing we know for sure is that it did not end in September 2008. The idea of carrying out an inquiry that is not extended beyond that date is simply outrageous, for it suggests that an examination is now to be carried out as to how the heat was applied, but how the pot boiled over is not actually going to be looked at, and what the government done on the night the pot boiled over is not even going to be questioned. On that night, I recall in this chamber being told by the Minister for Finance that the fundamentals were sound, that everything was in place, that there was nothing to be worried about, and that the banks actually had the cash to hand. We also witnessed later in October the financial regulator at that time again telling us that the financial fundamentals were sound. Now, how is it, and how was it, that those negotiations and those matters were carried out on that evening as members of the Dáil, travelling back here after summer recess, woke up to their radios to hear that a major situation existed in the banks, that legislation was going to be put in place, that a guarantee was going to be established, and that ultimately this would deal with the financial situation, and as the Minister stated at that time, that the system that was going to put in place was not going to cost the Irish Exchequer a single cent. Well, how far have we actually moved from that time? How far now, where things get spoken about in terms of billions and trillions, where millions of euros in terms of Exchequer accountability is now seen as something in the tuppenny halfpenny place? Rightly or wrongly, Ciaran Lynch, a significant percentage of the Irish public believe that there was collusion at a minimum, if not indeed some conspiracy between Fianna Fáil, the developers, builders and bankers, and that this ultimately led to the crashing of the Irish economy. The fact that 40% of disclosed donations to Fianna Fáil between 1997 and 2007 came from the construction and development sector is rightly regarded as suspicious. However, does this explain and give reason to why at the height of the property bubble over 80,000 houses were built surplus to requirements, yet prices during this period continued to set new records? Does it explain why rules governing mortgage lending went out the window as repayment periods were extended from 20 years out to 35 years and beyond? And does it explain why trusted banking approaches that provided a duty of care related to customers insofar as income lending ratios and property value ratios, these things no longer actually applied. And does it explain why 300,000 homes, as reported in this morning's press, are lying empty around the country, while 56,000 people are in need of housing? And ultimately, does it explain why now so many homeowners are facing negative equity and living with the real fear of having their home
Say to the
repossessed?
Deputy, there is 5 minutes left in this slot.
Okay, thank you. Okay. And can I share my time with Joe Costello? Thank you.
Agreed.
Let's concur to conclude. If, as Fianna Fáil frequently assert, there is no conspiracy, then it is in that party's interest to have a full public inquiry to assert this good name. And I see the Minister has come into the House, and in his response this evening, I would like him to state, and can he state, without any mental reservation, that the system he has proposed will be enough to thoroughly examine all the evidence and to allay public suspicion on this matter. And as for the Greens, well, the Greens proposed that they would be demanding that some principles would be inserted in this investigation. Well, that principle would have seemed to apply from a quotation by Groucho Marx. Here are my principles. If you don't like these, I've got some others. And obviously, that's what they've told Fianna Fáil in recent days. Let's concur that mention was made last evening in relation to parliamentary inquiries and about the Maguire and Arda judgment preventing Oireachtas inquiries in the future dealing with some matters. However, my own research and research conducted by me by the Library and Research Services here in Dáil Éireann does show that the ruling does not in any measure prohibit or prevent the Oireachtas from carrying out inquiries into policy matters or the activities of the holders of public office. On that basis, we can for certain hold the questioning of those in public office or have held public office and bring it into public view in this House. And there is no impediment to this, regardless of what fig leaf the Greens or Fianna Fáil choose to hide behind. There is a facility whereby members of government, both former and past, can in public be questioned as to what their activities and roles were over the last 10 years. Let's concur the collapse of the banking system and how it was left unmonitored and how lending, prudence and financial governance were allowed to become out of control is one of the biggest scandals in the history of the state. It is crucial to our country's future that a banking inquiry not only works, but is seen to work, as ultimately it is not only an inquiry about the reputation and management of the banking sector, but one that is also an examination of the reputation of this House and how it conducts its business. Thank you.